I think back to the days when I was a kid and I walked out in this river and I used to step on catfish and I had a catfish dangling from my foot. The Platte River is really becoming an endangered river. It's changing, and that's something that I want to stop if I can. I want the river of old.
The Platte River is one of the most important river systems in the Missouri River watershed. Beginning life in Colorado, the North Platte and South Platte rivers are both important western rivers on their own, and they're fed by small tributaries arising from Rocky Mountain snowmelt. The Platte is the culmination of a series of tributaries that carry water from basins that flow from several states. The North Platte gathers runoff from the Continental Divide, crossing northward into Wyoming, where it tumbles and grows before heading east into Nebraska. The South Platte is formed from drainage that includes much of the eastern flank of the Rockies known as the Front Range. The Platte then travels across the length of Nebraska, mingling along the way with other river systems. The Loup River, with its many branches, is fed by the crystalline waters of the Nebraska Sandhills and rolling prairies to the east. The Elkhorn River contributes its flow near Gretna, and the Nebraska Platte River terminates just south of Omaha when it empties into the Missouri River. The Platte is formed entirely from contributing river systems that are heavily utilized by upstream communities. Storage for irrigation and power generation, along with flood control, has changed the resulting flows to the Platte River dramatically.
The Platte River above Columbus is basically just a trickle generally because of irrigation and other demands for water. And so the water that we get down here is generally out of the Loup River Basin.
If heavy use by humans isn't enough, fluctuations in climate add to the pressure. Agriculture in Nebraska was booming through the early 2000s. As the number of irrigated acres in Nebraska increased through 2007, the effects of declining groundwater levels became evident, and prolonged drought conditions began to seriously affect the waterways. Less water in the rivers and streams meant more exposed surface area. Vegetation established on sandbars, slowing and stopping the fluid movement of the sands. The Nebraska legislature created the Riparian Vegetation Management Task Force in 2007.
When I got on the task force, quite frankly, I didn't know what a Phragmites was. And I then came back from my first task force meeting and I was out walking, looking for fishing spots, and I kept walking by these weeds and my gosh, they're Phragmites.
Miles of exposed shoreline on shrinking reservoirs created the perfect nursery for plants that had no natural enemies.
Look at how this weed is spreading. Acres of Phragmites downstream. It's coming quickly. We have to act now.
By the end of the year, Phragmites had received an emergency noxious weed designation across the state. Phragmites, also known as common reed, can be found in wetlands worldwide. There are two distinct biotypes. The subspecies Americana is native to North America and poses little or no threat to other plant species. The subspecies Australis is another story. It's an amazingly aggressive European variety that found its way into this country in the late 1800s. It reproduces easily by several methods.
One day I was fishing on the bank of the river, and I sat right next to a stand of Phragmites, and I put a stick at the end of a rhizome, and I sat there for a half a day fishing. It was a great fishing hole, caught a lot of nice catfish. And as the day progressed, I kept looking down at this stick, and I kept noticing how this Phragmites plant was growing beyond the stick. And by the end of the day, it had grown 2 to 3 inches.
Phragmites is an invasive plant, and they are better able to establish compared to other plants. They can take over large areas just within a season just by extending those rhizomes out. We've also seen that the Phragmites can also establish through plant fragments. They call them propagules. You have pieces of plants that break off, float in the river, and establish on these bars. Those plant pieces can root and grow and establish on those bars as well. And then there's also seed. There's mixed reports whether or not seeds are a major contribution in establishment.
Phragmites is a very ornamental plant, and although it has existed in Nebraska for some time, it wasn't recognized as a serious threat. By 2008, it became apparent that the non-native variety of Phragmites was creating a monoculture along the banks of several of Nebraska's major river systems, including the Republican, the Niobrara, and the legendary Platte River.
The thing that's really bothered me is when we had this influx of the willows and cottonwoods growing on these high sandbars with the Phragmites, is that the willows and the cottonwoods got so dense I couldn't even walk in that island, yet I could see the Phragmites, the rhizomes growing into that island, and new shoots of Phragmites growing in the interior of these islands. Just no way for us to conceivably go in and spray them. You couldn't physically walk through these islands.
With increasing demands on the water flowing through the state, the narrowing channels weren't the only concern. Many of the invaders, including the non-native Phragmites, were said to consume great quantities of water through evapotranspiration, which is a transfer of water to the atmosphere by means of the combined action of evaporation and plant transpiration through photosynthesis. The hollow stems of these reeds have been shown to be an efficient means for the transfer of water to the atmosphere. In Auburn, Nebraska, at the wastewater treatment plant, Phragmites is being used to do just that.
The last year that our old wastewater treatment plant was in service, we hauled 800,000 gallons of biosludge out of the old plant. And our problem with that was when it's wet, frozen ground, crops are in the ground, then we cannot apply that. So we had to time our applications to the weather conditions and crop conditions. With the facility we have now, then anytime we have biosolids or sludge ready to go, we can just pump it out here year-round.
The Auburn Wastewater Treatment Plant utilizes Phragmites to compost biosolids. The project was started in 2009 and it went online in 2011. There are similar projects around the country, but most of them use the non-native Phragmites.
When we put these reed beds in, we had to do DNA analysis to verify that they were native reeds, which we obtained from Ballard's Marsh up by Valentine.
The project has been successful, but there have been a few snags along the way. Identifying the non-native reeds proved to be easier than first expected.
And after 2 years, they really stuck out. And the thing that we really noticed with them is it's like aphids. The aphids, when they come in on our reeds here, they really suck them down, slow them down. That doesn't seem to bother the non-natives. They just keep right on going.
The native reeds are fairly resilient, and even though the foliage appears to die off from the aphid infestation, they will continue to do their job at the wastewater plant. The aggressive non-native Phragmites will predictably outcompete the native plants if nothing is done to control them. Managing Phragmites on the waterways of Nebraska is even more challenging. By the fall of 2008, the battle between Nebraska and Phragmites australis was underway on several fronts. The treatment is most effective in the fall, so it was a race against time and climate conditions. Finally, after several breezy days, the first round of aerial applications began on the Lower Platte River weed management area.
This project is unique statewide because the other projects currently being done in the state are being done in fully or over-appropriated areas. Federal and state funding is going there.
Funding for the project came from 3 natural resource districts: the Papio Missouri River, the Lower Platte North, and the Lower Platte South NRDs. Because they were funding their own project, they were able to be creative in their approach to the problem of invasives.
In the Lower Platte, we're not only going after the noxious weeds, the Phragmites and the purple loosestrife. We're looking at it in the big picture. We're going after the willows and the cottonwoods and the other native invasives that are taking over these sandbar islands.
So when you do have the vegetation in the middle of the channel, that limits your ability to provide good habitat for a lot of the species tied to the river.
Sokol Island is perhaps a worst-case scenario of what can occur over time when dense vegetation establishes on a sandbar. Woody plants and trees along with invasives have collected more and more sediment through the years. What started out as a high sandbar is in essence now a permanent island, which in turn has channelized an already low-flowing area of the river. The second phase of the Sokol Island experiment took place in the spring of 2009 with mechanical intervention.
There's multiple reasons why that vegetation should be removed. There's flood control, there's ice jams. These natural processes like ice and river flow, it does not regulate them and does not remove them from the river channel. And that's when you need those mechanical interventions such as disking or spraying to remove that vegetation.
The 15-acre Sokol Island is a test site, a field experiment. It could be several years before anyone knows whether or not large islands can be removed from the Platte River. The battle against Phragmites is still going strong on the lower Platte River. The aerial treatment by helicopter takes place every fall now. Members of the lower Platte Weed Management Area are constantly on the lookout for new infestations. Unfortunately, Phragmites migration has not been limited to rural locations. Treatment of infestations on waterways like Salt Creek, which runs through the city of Lincoln, presents a different set of challenges.
You know, a landowner is told, he gets a letter from a county saying, you've got Phragmites on in the river channel and you're responsible for its eradication. And oh my gosh, I mean, that's a pretty costly venture. And so that was one of the reasons why we decided that the cost share program might be beneficial.
The cost share program addresses infestations that affect the lower Platte River, including tributaries, creeks, and streams that flow into it. Treating invasive plants like Phragmites is expensive, and funding outside of those areas isn't always available. Unfortunately, this prolific and resilient plant is starting to show up in some rather surprising places.
One of the mysteries that we have in Lancaster County that we'd like to kind of figure out are the pathways for Phragmites. Yeah, we're in a gigantic frag patch here that we're wondering how it's boomed to this size of an infestation. We're not in standing water, we're not along a creek side. We are in a lower lying area, but certainly not where water sits all the time. We've got different heights and sizes of frag down here. It appears to be some of this frag may have been mowed off over the years or cut off over the years. Other frag here we don't think has had anything done to it for a long time.
Education is an important tool in fighting Phragmites. The plant is resilient and will grow in unusual places under adverse conditions. In the past few years, much more information has become available about this aggressive plant and how to attack it. Some traditional methods that work on other weeds are not effective on Phragmites. Disking or plowing it under can actually cause the plant to spread more quickly. Extreme weather events, wildlife, and of course man could be helping to spread the plant. Infestations are not limited to riparian areas. They are showing up in gravel piles for road construction and maintenance, drainage ditches, forage fields, and flower beds. Whether the setting is rural or urban, identifying this noxious weed early and then applying the right control methods can make all the difference.
If you treat a small patch while it's out there, it's going to consist a little bit of your time. It's going to consist of some money, things like that, to treat that small patch. But you can get ahead of it. If that patch gets to where we're at today in this field here, which it wouldn't take it long to get to this point, then what does it cost you to control that land?
Well, I don't think there's any question that the Phragmites can be handled chemically, and I think that we can stay on top of it. The cottonwoods, the other invasives, different story. If they get too big, then it's going to take mechanical removal.
The Sokol Island field experiment has shown mixed results. Initially, much of the woody vegetation responded to the aerial treatment, though not as dramatically as hoped.
I think we've been successful to a certain degree. Some of the sandbars, the high sandbars, have been eroding with the higher flows the last year or so. The one thing that I've learned is we don't ever want to get in a situation where we let the cottonwoods, some of the native trees, the cottonwoods and the willows, get to the 10, 15, or 20 foot height on these sandbars, because once they get to that height, those sandbars they will become islands rather than a sandbar.
High water inflows are needed to keep vegetation from accumulating on sandbars, but inconsistent and, in some cases, extreme climate conditions make managing these sandbars difficult. Multiple dry years allow vegetation to firmly establish on the sandbars, making management efforts even more challenging and expensive. Localized drought conditions or clogged waterways hundreds of miles away could affect what happens here on the Lower Platte.
Nebraska has a long history of having an identity as a tree state. And Nebraska, as a state where Arbor Day is a national pastime, and that should continue. But I think that the other identity that is being lost in the process is that Nebraska is a prairie state, and that Nebraska's prairie and Nebraska's riparian areas have become a home for trees, and a home where trees are becoming increasingly area where we need to turn our attention towards. A statewide effort needs to begin to start a vegetation management program.
Everything is connected, especially along Nebraska's many miles of rivers and streams. What happens on our waterways affects everything. When water doesn't flow from Wyoming or Colorado, or from the sandhills, or the lush rolling hills to the north, everyone who depends on that water suffers. It affects farmers, ranchers, cities, and towns. It also affects the wild residents on the rivers. What happens to our most endangered and treasured species on the river could happen to us. Their future is ours. We must continue the work to preserve and protect this precious and wonderful resource, our Platte River.